Hi, thank you for joining us. My name is Greg Auerbach. I'm a senior director here with Henry Schein Dental Practice Transitions. I take care of our valuations and operations team. Just a little reminder today, there's no CE for this presentation. And if you have any questions, please place them in the question and answer box, the Q&A box on the side, and we'll go ahead and get back to you with answers by email after the presentation. Again, my name is Greg. Joining me today are Jack Minahan and Christy Conway-Davis. Jack has 11 years of dentistry experience, all with Henry Schein, and has been with our DPT team for about 2 years. And Christy has 23 years in dentistry and almost 3.5 years now here with our dental practice transitions team. We're excited to have both of them to bring their perspectives to the conversation today, where we're talking about mistakes that you might be making in your practice and really trying to understand the purchaser's perspective in that. These two are excellent guides for that, as they are working out in the field every day, dealing with purchasers and sellers like you and owners like you on a daily basis. So they have a lot of good experience to bring. Just as an overview of what we're going to be talking about today, I'm going to give you a little bit about current market trends and what we're seeing as far as the work that we're doing in the marketplace overall. We'll discuss equipment and facility, components of cash flow, exit planning, and really about emergency exit planning. And then we have one more thing, just a little add-on towards the end. Just as some perspective as to what we do in the business, and to give you some perspective as to why this is important in the data that we're gathering to bring to you on a presentation. Since 2021, we've done almost 2,000 practice valuations, and that's representing over $1.8 billion in value. We are processing valuations every day for practices across the country. And so our expertise is really deep as far as that goes. And again, this is just since 2021, and we've been in business over 25 years, practice transitioning and valuing practices throughout the country. In 2023 alone, we did almost 425 practice valuations with a combined practice value of almost $400 million. Followed that up in 2024 with all about the same amount, 423 practice valuations, and again, $430 million in practice value. That's actually up in practice value about 8% from 2023. But again, that's our constant flow of what we do on a day in, day out basis and an annual basis. But then you can also see where the market had turned just in the single year between 2023 and 2024. You might be asking where we are currently. We'll get there in a minute. But the rest of what we did in 2024, just for perspective, is we had 234 practice sales within our national team, representing almost or over $190 million in sales. And that number is pretty steady. We do a couple of hundred practice sales per year with the over 400 valuations, meaning that a lot of you are also getting valuations for non-practice sales, which is vitally important, something that we'll talk about a little bit later in the presentation, as it's great for planning. First quarter of 2025, as promised, we've done 100 valuations so far, so we're well on pace to our over 400 valuations for the year and over $88 million in practice value. I will put an asterisk on that as I work with this team on a day in and day out basis. As we're presenting right now, just after tax day, this does not include all of those that are in our queue for valuations where tax returns were just submitted and such just filed. So we are just queuing those up. So we actually have a pretty big inflow to come, and that number will jump up quite considerably in the coming weeks, as we've been very busy as your all accountants are starting to take their vacations. So again, the first quarter of this year and the first few months of this year have been quite busy as far as our practice transitions business goes. We are the largest in the country, and we do more valuations and more practice sale work than anybody else does. So really, again, the expertise that is being brought to you today as far as what we do and what we can suggest to you in your practice is pretty deep. Just a little perspective on the dental landscape for you as a practice owner. It is still a seller's market in most of the country. Despite what is going on, whether it be the economy or otherwise, we still have more sellers coming to the market. knowing that their practice values have been increasing over the last few years. We have more purchasers than there are sellers, and therefore practice values are continuing to be at peak levels as they have been for the last several years. So again, I did talk about there being more purchasers than sellers. We've seen over the last few years that while the number looks like it's fairly stable, for the average retirement age, it's just under 69. You can see that on the bottom right, where 2018, it was just under 69, and it's still there in 2023. These slight variations of 0.1 or 0.2 that happen in between are actually huge, drastic changes overall in the retirement landscape, because again, this is averaging over 200,000 practitioners in the dental marketplace overall. So we do have more purchasers than there are sellers out there. So there really is a demand in most of the country for your practices. But that still means that you need to have a quality practice and a quality operating practice to maximize your value. There is still expected from the ADA, and it's something that I've talked about for years upon years, about a surge of baby boomers coming into retirement. Now, again, that may shift based on where the economy is or what's going on in your personal lifestyle. And therefore, your retirement age may be a little bit more than 69, or it may be quite a bit less. But we do expect a surge of sellers, which again just reiterates that we need to make sure that your practices are operating at the highest possible level, and that you're best positioned, that when it is that you do want to transition, that you're best positioned in the market to get the most interest and can drive your practice value as high as possible. You can see on the bottom right the difference between 2010 and 2020. Again, this is information from the ADA Health Policy Institute about the breakdown of where practitioners are. And you can see that skew just a little bit to the left between 2010 and 2020. Again, showing that we have many more younger practitioners in the market than there are older that are looking to retire. That's some of the just broad perspective. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you now, Jack. And why don't you give some perspective and a little bit more information about where our dental purchasers are right now?
Sure. Thanks, Greg. So one of the questions that I get most commonly when I'm working with some of my clients in the field is this a good time to sell? And I think to answer that question, it's important for us to better understand the current market trends and the profile of our potential purchasers and how that's sort of changed over the years. So to answer that question, let's take a look at some of the data. So the great news is that the vast majority of dental practices are still single location offices. That's 76% of the dentists are single location. This also includes multi-doctor practices. The one drastic change that we've noticed in recent years is that private practice ownership is still steadily declining. And in 2015, only 50% of dentists were in solo practice. That's one doctor per location. And in about a 7-year span from 2015 to 2022, we see that number decrease by about 14%. The more concerning data point is that 50% of solo practitioners are more than 25 years out of school. So those are doctors that are presumably approaching that retirement age. Like Greg mentioned, that is the potential surge in baby boomers that are going to be looking to sell here in the next few years. While new grads who have just been out of school for up to 10 years are only making up about 17% of those solo practitioners. So that said, we have a lot of dentists that are approaching that retirement age, but less and less dentists going into ownership as they come into the workforce out of dental school. So a lot of this has to do with market consolidation. More and more DSOs are entering the market and buying up practices. And we've actually seen that some of these doctors are 3 times more likely to work for those larger groups than they were 10 years ago. We also saw that about 34% of the class of 2023 coming out of dental school mentioned that they plan to join a DSO at some point. So a rather dynamic shift in sort of the difference between those doctors that are approaching the selling age and those coming in as potential buyers. We are also seeing practice ownership decline as it relates to gender. So only about 60% of female practitioners in 2023 were reported as private practice owners. Similarly, 80% of male practitioners were reported as private practice owners in 2023. And we've seen that number drop about 10% for both of those over the last 15 to 20 years. Not only is this a result of DSO consolidation, but we're also seeing record amounts of student loan debt for those new practitioners. And in 2023, we saw that average student loan debt reach a record high of almost $300,000. With those new graduates, only about 16% of them had no student debt at all. So between that market consolidation that we were talking about and some of these drastically high numbers in student loan debt, our purchasers are faced with brand new challenges that might impact their decision-making process when they're looking at a practice to purchase when the time is right for them. And location of these practices will also play a vital role in their decision-making process. So many of our buyers will prefer more of those suburban or urban type of areas when they're looking to acquire a practice. And this is really good news for some of our sellers who are in those areas because more competition is going to result in higher practice values. On the flip side of that, we are noticing that a lot of our purchasers tend to be less inclined to buy practices in those more rural communities. And by having less buyers in those areas, it can have a negative impact on practice values. What I will say is that in a lot of these areas, there's less dentists per capita. So it does pose a really great opportunity for these buyers to maximize their earning potential. But again, it's a little bit harder just because not everybody wants to be in some of those more rural communities. Okay, so by understanding some of these market trends, how can we better assist our sellers to achieve the highest possible value for their practice? Taking into consideration that some of these new buyers are going to be facing some of these more unknown challenges that we just discussed. And in order to do that, as sellers, we want to try to avoid some of these common mistakes that myself and I know Christy sees in the field every single day. And one of those big mistakes that we do see is our sellers neglecting equipment, technology, and office aesthetics type of updates. So let's take a look at a recent case study. And this is actually a tale. Let's take a look at a recent case study. This is a tale of two practices. Let's assume that all things are created equal amongst these two practices. They're both 800,000 in collections, 6 operatories, and the only fundamental difference between the two of them is that practice A has more current in their equipment, technology, and office aesthetics, and practice B is a little bit more quote unquote vintage or dated within the practice. So the question is, would the value of these two practices be the same? And the answer is no. Typically, when we look at practice values, on average, it might be close to 75% of prior year collections. So we wouldn't consider both of these offices to be worth $600,000 in this particular example. I will say in my personal territory, I had a similar situation last year where I had two separate practices that were right around 400,000 in collections. One of those offices had all up-to-date technology. It was a brand new remodeled space. It had everything that a new buyer would potentially want in that practice. And we were getting offers for nearly 120% of prior year collections, which in our world for a practice of that size is very, very high. Conversely, I had another practice in similar revenues that only sold for about 70% of collections because it was a much more dated and a much more vintage practice. And case studies like this are happening all across the country. And we know that our purchasers are going to want and look for that more modern feel. They want to have cone beam, they want to have a fully integrated digital workflow, and they want to have that sleek, modern look, and they're willing to pay a premium for it. So, as a seller, looking at a buyer's perspective, here are some additional things to keep in mind. Having outdated equipment can impact patient outcomes and patient care. Technology helps our clinicians identify and diagnose more dentistry, and buyers want to be able to have those tools ready to go in the practice so they feel confident about the clinical care that they can provide to their patients. Secondarily, buyer perception can have a negative impact on the psychology of the deal. Buyers want to feel confident walking into a space and be able to answer the question, can I see myself working here every single day? And more outdated facilities can have a negative impact on that perception. Maintenance costs are always something to consider as well. Older equipment is going to require more upkeep. It's going to require more dollars and time to keep that equipment functional. And new buyers aren't going to want to have to worry about being down a chair, unit, light during the day to see their patients. The current landscape is much more competitive, and patients as consumers recognize the difference between a more modern or a dated facility. And buyers want to feel confident knowing that patients will want to come to their office and they're not going to want to consider going to a different practice that might have a more modern feel and might have that technology that makes them feel like they're getting treated for all of the care that they need. And finally, upgrades require more capital. And if our buyers are going to have to make investments into those types of equipments and technologies that are in the practice, it can have an adverse effect on their perception of the practice value. And buyers want to have that turnkey space, and they don't want to have to worry about spending time and money to modernize that space. So when you're considering potential updates to your facility, timing matters. And as always, no matter where you are in your transition journey, you should always consult with an expert when you're considering potential facility updates. When we look at timing, if you're close to retirement age, meaning you're within 2 years of a potential transition, we generally advise not to do much with the practice. And that's mostly just because we don't want you taking on substantial debt that you're going to have to settle with the sale proceeds at the time of closing. So at this time, maybe consider going digital, take a look at some software updates, take a look at some of the aesthetics of the practice, maybe redo some paint, update some flooring. But other than that, generally, we'd advise you not to do much. If you're 2 to 5 years from a transition, again, consult with an expert, make sure that you know exactly what you're doing. Here, we don't want to be considering too many new purchases, but it could be a good time to look at some updated technology, whether that's digital scanners, CAD/CAM technology, PANs, or CBCT, just to see if it might fit within sort of the portfolio of your practice. And as always, consider going paperless during this time as well. If you're closer to 5 to 10 years from your transition, this is a great time for you to be considering digital radiography, both from a PAN standpoint, CBCT, and if you haven't updated to digital sensors, this is a great time to do that. Start working on transitioning your practice to paperless. If you are, handwriting notes in your charts, this is a great time to, facilitate getting that into your practice management software. Make sure you're keeping your computers up to date and review any other larger ticket items. Anything 10 years and up from where you're considering your transition, digital radiography and going paperless is an absolute must. This is a great time to, continue investing in your computer technology. And this is when you should definitely be considering updating other equipment in your practice. That includes your chairs, units, lights, cabinetry, looking at the overall aesthetics of the practice, as well as making sure that you're also aware of other technologies like CBCT and CAD/CAM. Okay, so from the eyes of the buyer, which situation do you think they would prefer? Would they be more comfortable working in an operatory that's got that clean, sleek look with newer equipment, newer technology, nice wide open space with good lighting? Or would they want more of a cluttered or carpeted space? And the answer is pretty obvious. A lot of these buyers are used to working in facilities that have all the bells and whistles, and this is only going to help attract the best possible buyer and the best possible price for your practice if you can avoid those types of situations where there's clutter or even carpet in your operatories. So let's take a look at some other parts of the practice. What about your reception area? Your reception area is considered to be the first impression of your practice. That goes for both patients and potential buyers of your business. When we have somebody walk in, especially a buyer that's considering purchasing it, are they going to see a more bright, modern type of look? Or is it going to be dark and dreary with older equipment, older furniture, and older furnishings. So it's important to make sure that you're making that strong first impression anytime somebody's coming into your practice. Which sterilization area would you prefer? Is your sterilization area typically clean and organized, or is it messy? Does it have instruments everywhere? Is there older equipment that's sitting on the countertops? Is there things in there that just don't need to be there? Think about making sure that you're keeping that space super clean, super tidy. And if you need to update any of the equipment in that space, this is a good time to do so as well. Lastly, your private office. Is your private office typically clean and organized, or does it have messy clutter everywhere? This is where the doctor or the potential buyer is going to be spending the majority of their downtime taking care of administrative tasks, having meetings and consulting with patients on various things. So it's important for them to feel like this can be a homey feel and that they can, see themselves working in there for a vast majority of their career. Okay, so in conclusion, and before we move on to sort of the next topic of our presentation, I wanted to leave you with just a few other considerations to help you make your practice a little bit more appealing to potential buyers. And one of which is thinking about your cancellations within your practice, which also is relatable to the space that you have in order to fit new patients into your current space. So let's just take a look at an example. Let's consider one cancellation or one hygiene cancellation per day in your practice. And let's just say that your fee is $143 per pro fee, plus the periodic oral evaluation that you would do for that single visit. And if we look at a 4-day work week, that's $185 per appointment, which would be equal to $740 per week. If we extrapolate that out to a full year, depending on how much you're working, whether that's 45 or 50 weeks, that can be as much as $33,000 to $37,000 per year in lost real dollars to your business. So again, it's really important to think about, do you have technology in your practice to help with patient reminder systems? Do you have the space to support emergencies and additional hygiene opportunities to see these patients, just to make sure that you're not losing opportunities to bring them in? And consider, expanding those opportunities and looking at those new technologies as you start to plan for your transition. Lastly, try to avoid unstable staff issues. And in today's day and age, obviously that can be easier said than done. Additionally, you want to try to keep those specialty procedures outside of your practice. When a doctor is doing a lot of specialty procedures in their practice, it's tougher for a buyer to come in and see themselves being able to replace you. So if you're close to transitioning and you are considering maybe adding ortho, endo, oral surgery, those types of procedures to your practice, just think about how that could impact the potential buyer when they're coming in and considering your practice as an opportunity. And lastly, try to avoid any unsupported overhead. That's additional staffing or pay raises, especially as you get close to the actual transition date. And with that, I'll pass it along to Christy to talk about a little bit more details around cash flow and profitability of dental practices.
Thank you, Jack. So one of the biggest mistakes that our sellers can make is not understanding how their cash flow can affect their practice sale. So we're going to touch on the tale of two practices, part 2. Jack covered part 1. He used this example. So now we're going to talk about the tale of two practices. Jack used this example before, and now we're going to use it with the differentiating factor being overhead. So many people think, as Jack talked about, the practice is just worth a certain amount of their collections. But if one practice has a 50% overhead and the other has a 70%, are they both worth just 75% of collections? Absolutely not. Practice B has a much stronger cash flow. So the value of your practice is not just dependent on collections, but cash flow is heavily weighing into that. Let's talk about what cash flow is and why it is so important to both buyers and lenders. Essentially, it's the movement of money in and out of the practice. Besides the number of ops and how much the practice is collecting, this really is one of the most important factors that the buyers are looking for. They want to know, what is the practice cash flowing at? The lenders are looking at cash flow as really a key metric for the financial health of the practice. Think of it like this. If a buyer has the choice between a practice cash flowing at 100,000 versus 300,000, they're obviously going to pick the 300,000 unless your practice has something else very special that makes it stand out, like 6 or 7 ops, you fully invested in all the technology. Buyers really are looking for that unicorn practice. It has high cash flow, right number of ops, all the technology, new equipment, reasonable rent, strong hygiene department, and of course, great staff willing to stay on. So not only does this cash flow have a big impact on the practice value, but also how easy it is to market. Practices with high cash flow will usually get the most attention and go with multiple offers, close in 60 days, while the practices with that low cash flow, they're going to sit on the market a little bit longer. Now, what are the lenders looking at when seeing if your practice is going to be a good fit for the buyer? All buyers are getting pre-qualified with the lender before we show them a practice. The lender is looking at their liquidity, their dental school debt, their monthly expenses, and their production reports at the office that they're currently working at. They are not fully approved, however, until they go through the underwriting process, and the buyer's financials are matched with the seller's financials. The lenders are using what is called a debt service coverage ratio. That is the indicator to see if this deal is going to work or not. So, for example, one of the lenders uses a ratio of 1.25 or higher, meaning that the practice's operating income must be 25% higher than the debt obligation. So, this is really where the cash flow comes into play. Let's look at how we come up with the cash flow. The image on the right is an example of what we use in our valuation on a practice. It's not very often that the seller's financials are perfectly clean. Usually they're running some personal expenses through the business for tax purposes. What we are showing here in one column are their actual financials, and in the right column are the adjusted financials. We are looking for any potential add backs we can find that a new buyer would not be responsible for. We do this so that we can give the buyers an idea of what the practice will be cash flowing at. At the bottom, we're putting in the purchase price, and then we're showing what that monthly mortgage payment will be when we add in the working capital with their loan term and interest rate. And then we are annualizing that payment and subtracting it out of the practice's net income to get what we're calling the net cash flow. So as you can see, that 392 in the bottom right, that's the net cash flow after debt payment that this buyer would expect to take home. That's the number most buyers are looking directly at when they receive our practice summary. They want to see if this practice is going to be the best fit. And it might have worked for you all these years to take home. You were okay with what you were getting paid, but you were not having to pay a practice loan. So unfortunately, that low number, once we take the buyer's practice loan into consideration, it can't always sustain a new buyer with their dental school debt and their monthly living expenses.
Hey, Christy, I just want to jump in here just for 1 second. I just want to go through the document really quickly, if that's okay. Like on the top, just so there's a clarity, we have collections, which would be the total income of your practice itself. And then in the middle, we take care of all of the practice overhead. So these are all of those expenses, which Christy just mentioned, as far as what we're making adjustments on to show what your true practice operating overhead would be as a practice entity. Where Christy mentioned all of those things that we take out because they're personal items, we take those out of the practice because, again, we want to clean it up as a practice entity itself. And that's what we would call, or the bank would call, add backs. With that, we're going to get to what a clean practice overhead is, as well as a practice net income. And from there, which what Christy you speak great about, was the practice loan. That you may not have a practice loan right now, but a purchaser likely will. So when we're talking to a purchaser, they need to understand what that cost is and what they're going to take home in the practice after they pay for it, because that's exactly what the lender is doing too. The lender wants to know that they're going to get money back. They want to know that the practice is sufficient to cover the debt service ratio that Christy was talking about, but also all of those personal expenses that a practitioner may have. And so that's why that estimated income before taxes at the very bottom, or that net cash flow after debt service, is so vitally important to the conversation and vital to what purchasers are looking at, so they can have a good understanding of where the practice is.
All right, so add backs. We talked about these, both Greg and I, in this cash flow documentation. What are they? These are any personal or non-reoccurring expenses that are added back to the net income of the practice during evaluation. So as I showed you in that slide previously, these help show the buyer the true profitability of the practice by removing all those expenses that the new owner is not necessarily going to incur. These can include anything owner related, like their salary, health insurance, Costco monthly bill, car payments, family cell phone plans. Then we're going to look at the one-time or non-reoccurring expenses. Did they have any legal or consulting fees? Maybe they upgraded all their computers, paid for a new air conditioner or vacuum pump. These are not annual expenses that a new buyer would have to make every year, so we add those back. They might be paying their child or spouse a salary to work in the practice, but they don't actually work in the practice. They might be writing off their Hawaii vacation while they attend one CE class, or donating to charity, paying their golf membership through the practice. All of these are add backs, along with interest, tax, depreciation, and amortization. None of these are reflecting the actual operating performance of the dental practice, so they're added back. Common mistakes that can really harm cash flow. If your financials are an absolute mess, it's going to be very hard for us to get the deal approved with an underwriter. I once had a doctor who owned multiple properties and was running everything through their dental business. We had 3 offers on the practice, tried every lender, and not one would approve the deal. It was just too messy, and the financials could not be verified. So if your operational costs are out of control, the buyer and their team of the lender, their consultant, their CPA, they're going to question if you are running the rest of your business correctly. Overall, it's going to cause a lot of hesitation, especially if they are seeing these huge fluctuations in cash flow and we don't have the reasons or the documentation to back that up. Really is best for us to catch this in the valuation phase so that you have time to either clean up your financials with your CPA, or if there's a reason for the fluctuations, we at least have a story to tell the underwriter and hopefully to be able to get that approved. So the question everyone is wondering, what is your practice worth today? We find this out by performing evaluation. This is the first step you should be taking when you are starting to think about your exit strategy, and it really is essential for making just an informed decision. As far as timing, this should not be right when you are ready to sell. I'll do it right when you're ready to sell, but if we do it that time, the value is what the value is. You don't have any time to make any changes because you've either already decided that you are ready to retire, or maybe you don't have a choice because your body is telling you that you can no longer do this. Ideally, we want to have this done 3 to 5 years in advance. If that valuation comes back exactly where you are hoping it would, great. As long as you're able to keep your foot on the gas pedal, you can continue to work as long as you want, but the moment that you take your foot off the gas pedal, you know that your value is going to go down accordingly. Lenders want to see practices that are staying steady or increasing, not declining. If that valuation comes back not where you were hoping for, and you did it 3 to 5 years in advance, that's okay. This gives you an opportunity to make adjustments. I did a valuation for a doctor 3 years ago, pointed out some areas that she could work on. We just updated her valuation. She had increased her collections by 25%. Wasn't by working any harder, she did it by working smarter. She needed some help with her practice management software, cleaned up some inefficiencies she had in the office. We put her practice on the market recently. We had multiple offers and we are in escrow now. Her planning paid off. So some people out there are going to say that they offer a free valuation. Taking a look at one profit and loss and a collection report and giving you a number is not going to give you an accurate valuation. We use 3 methods with our valuation process. That is the asset, the market comparable sales, and the income approach. Let's dive into what each of these are. In the asset approach, we are basically taking all your tangible assets like equipment, supplies, AR, cash, combining that with all your intangible assets like your goodwill, staff, name, restricted covenant. We're taking the market value of both assets. We're also using the goodwill registry to track goodwill in prior transactions, and we're combining all of those together. The market comparable sales approach is simply looking at all the data from our previous transactions. What type of practice you have, your location, what technology you have, where your overhead falls. Also using the Goodwill registry again, and basically finding comps for your practice. As you can see in this next scattergram, as you can see here in this scattergram, this shows all the sales and valuations we have done since 2021. Greg talked about the numbers in the beginning. They are significant. We have a lot of data. And then we're looking at the locations in these next 2 images that come up on the screen to basically find your comps in the area. The final method is the income approach, and this is where that cash flow really comes into play. We're looking at 3 to 4 years of your financials, profit and loss statements, tax returns. As I explained earlier, we're looking for the add backs, but we are also looking for normalizations on certain expenses. When we perform evaluation, we are asking a lot of questions, especially if those financials are not in line with the national averages that they should be. Sometimes your CPA might not be dental specific and they have miscategorized something because they don't understand. This next slide is showing you, based on a $1 million practice, what your overhead percentages should be according to your specialty. This is a graph provided by one of our lenders. And when these percentages are way out of line, we may have an issue with getting a deal approved. So these are the 3 methods that we use, and combining that with our final opinion of our valuators is how we come up with the value for your office. Ideally, you want a planned exit strategy, but every practitioner, regardless of your age, needs an emergency exit strategy. Sometimes things happen and they are out of our control. So it is very important for your family members to be prepared in that scenario. Did you know that when a practitioner dies, only 30% of those practices are going to sell within the first 90 days? I always say it's like a melting ice cream cone, and that value is just slipping away the further it gets. I do have a real life story, unfortunately. I had a doctor that came to me and did evaluation. I did not know that he was sick. And about 6 months later, I received a call from his office manager that said I was told that if anything happened to doctor with his surgery and it went wrong, to call you immediately and to ask you to sell the practice. And unfortunately, the doctor had passed. Because we had already done that valuation, I had all the documentation that we needed. I needed a few updated reports from his software. Within 2 days, we had that practice up and listed. Within another 2 days, we had a showing and we had 16 buyers come and 6 full price and over asking offers. That does not happen all that often. Um, because we worked with the family and the office manager who had been there for 32 years, and let me back up a little bit. The seller owned his real estate, and I recognized right away I'm a real estate agent, but if we were going to throw real estate into it, we could not get this done as quickly as we needed to for the sake of his practice. So we were going to offer the buyer first right of refusal or option to purchase. The more important thing was to sell this practice. We had underwriting approved in 2 days. We had the due diligence complete. This was going to be the successful case story for how to prepare yourself in case of an emergency. Unfortunately, a family friend who was a real estate agent came in at the last minute and said, whoa, 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 let's slow this whole thing down. This real estate is worth so much more. We can get so much more for the practice. Let's just stop. He had zero clue what he was doing, and he killed the entire deal. It was really sad. The letter went out to the patients notifying him that the doctor was deceased, and off the patients went. The staff left. It was very, very unfortunate. I fast forward 2 years later, he did finally, they tried to run the practice for a couple of years, but there was nothing left. So the building finally sold. And the practice really wasn't anything there, so they didn't get any value for the practice. The moral that I try and teach with this story is that you don't just tell one person. And we have this what if documentation that we can help provide you. It is called the letter of instruction. And this is a document that every practitioner should have filled out as a just in case and a what if, right? Sellers have all that information in their head. They know who their landlord contact is, who their CPA is. This isn't a legally binding thing, but at least you can write out your wishes, have all the, relevant contact information, make a copy, keep one at home with a spouse, and keep one at the office with an office manager. And tell more than one person what your wishes would be should something happen like that. Because we don't want to see those things happen, especially in a story like that. This is a QR code that you can scan to request the letter of instruction to be emailed to you. So as you can tell, the valuation is a critical part of both your exit strategy and your emergency exit strategy. Here are a few pages out of our valuation that are going to come up on the screen. It really is the most comprehensive valuation on the market. We've recently enhanced our valuation with our partnership with Henry Schein One and Jarvis Analytics. And this is giving you even more analytics in our valuation. As you can see from all these pages, it is beyond comprehensive. So I'm going to hand this off to Greg, who will be talking about not understanding collections, and we'll be able to finish off our webinar.
Just in case, Christy, just in case you are right now and you say you want to get evaluation because you need it, which you do, there's a QR code here you can scan, which will get you to a form and get you to our local transitions consultant for you to help you with that valuations process because it's that important. Thanks, Christy. Appreciate it. This was the one more thing. I felt a little left out when we were putting things together, that I didn't get to really talk to you all about things that I've seen out in the market. I've been doing this for over 20 years in transacting and evaluating practices, and not understanding where your collections are and how you can drive your collections and what that really means to you personally, and then what it ultimately means to a purchaser has been one of those top line things that I think is vitally important. So I wanted to make sure we brought it to you. So let's just take up one example of not keeping up with the cost of dentistry. Overall, let's take an example of one single crown that's at $27.40. The national average is just a little bit higher, but we're going to call your national average UCR fee of $1,547 for this one single crown. We're going to assume that it takes you about an hour and 3/4 to put together. There's a lab fee of $155 that goes with that, $95 in supplies, and then you have all of your fixed expenses in your office. So that's everything else that are not variable, which are lab and supplies. So that would be staff, rent, utilities, everything else that it takes to run your office. We're operating at around $525 an hour. And we're going to multiply that by the hour and 3/4 that it's taking you for that one single crown. So that's about $919. If we take the $1,547, subtract out the lab fee, subtract out the supplies, and subtract out all of those fixed expenses that it takes you to operate your practice on an hourly basis, we have a pre-tax earning of $378. If we divide that over the hour and 3/4, that leaves you with around $216 per hour earnings. So essentially you're getting paid $216 an hour to go to work. I mean, I would argue that's not too bad. This is what happens though when you start discounting your fees. Let's look at 90% UCR. So 90% of UCR would then put you at $1,392 for that exact same crown. You're going to probably use the same lab. You're going to have the same supplies. Your fixed expenses aren't going to change because you don't need less staff or less space or anything else to do that. So your pre-tax earning on that 90% UCR crown is now $223, or roughly $127 per hour. We'll take it one step further, and at 80%, we'll look at your fee is about $1,200 per hour. Takes you the same amount of time. You don't get to do it any faster. You probably don't know that it's a 20% discounted fee, and so you don't send it to your discounted lab. You also don't know to go pull the discounted supplies off of your shelf. And your fixed expenses, again, don't change because your hourly wages, which is most of your fixed expenses, nor does your rent change based on the discounted fee that you provided at the top. So all of those stay the same. Now you're earning $69 for the time that you've put into that crown, and your earnings per hour is just under $40 per hour. I'm not going to go any further. I think that pretty much gives you a good perspective, especially when we say that $39 per hour is less than a hygienist gets paid, making $350 per day. And as Jack and Christy will attest, and I know hygienists in much of the country, they are getting paid more than $350 per day. So that sets that standard even higher than the $44 per hour, and makes you really question whether the 20% discount on that single crown was very well worth it to bring the patient into the practice. Ultimately, this discounting, it doesn't matter what it is. It could be a friends and family discount. It could be a church or a religious discount. It could be your country club. It could be PPOs, which is most often what it is. And to be honest, a PPO fee, a discount of 20%, is likely pretty light for most PPOs throughout the country. So keep that in mind. Again, when you're looking at your fee schedules and what you have going on in your practice, that there could be a significant amount of money just being left on the table because of discounting the top line fee in your practice. If we take this a little bit further though, if we take the one discounted crown per day at about $1,500 of UCR versus the $1,219 that we had at 20% off, if we multiply this out again, kind of like what Jack did earlier on, and we take your 4-day work week, we get that to be about $1,500 a day. Again, we're just saying 1 crown per day. The 1 crown per day is about $6,100 per week, We multiply that by 45 and 50 weeks. For the full UCR, you're talking just under somewhere between $275,000 and $300,000 per year of collections. That's top line collections for that one single crown. If we discount that at 20% off, we now drop down to under $5,000 per week. And that becomes $220,000 to $244,000 per year in collections. Considering that a step further, if we compare the 45 weeks, we have a total loss in your 45 weeks between your full UCR and the 20% discount of almost $55,000 per year. Around here, we talk a lot about capitalization rates, and that was one of the approaches that Christy talked about a little bit earlier. That's the income approach. So this is assessing risk on your practice and assigning value. But that $55,000 of loss over the 45 weeks, capitalized at 20%, which I'm going to tell you right now is a very good cap rate right now in the market. The total loss in value because of that $55,000 not in your pocket per year is $275,000. Over a 50-week year, the money goes up to $61,000 per year, and the total loss is over $300,000 in value. Now, mind you, this is not just the component of how much value you're losing. I'm also concerned about how much cash flow you're losing, because that very likely is funding your retirement. Your retirement is not being funded through a practice transition in almost every single case. You need to spend the time throughout your career stuffing money into your retirement fund so that when it is that you want to quit, you are ready to do so and you have the funds to do so. So many times we have conversations with practice owners who are just about ready to retire, and they are told by their financial planner or their accountant that they do not have the money to do that, that they are simply not in a place to be able to retire when they want to. This kind of consideration and how much goes out the door in discounted fees can make that difference, because this 1 crown discount per day could fund every year of your retirement for many years to set you up very nicely for the time when it is that you're ready to retire. Another component is not just about discounting, but it's also about increasing your fees, which is something you should be doing regardless of what's going on in the world every single year. And why do we say that? It's because the reality is the operating costs of your practice and every other expense in your office is going up every single year. So again, all of those operating costs that it takes to run your practice, including lab fees, that's a third party in almost every case. Those costs are going to go up. If you look at your lease or look at your overall expenses between insurance and taxes every year, those costs almost always go up. Your team wants a raise, or they have benefits, or their training expenses. Those get more costly every year. That's all in your practice. This is not even talking about what's going on at home. And utility costs go up every year. Food costs go up every year. We've been dealing with inflationary pressures for the last several years, and the anticipation of that increasing even more. If you're not taking care of things in your practice where you are making money and you're taking that money home, then you will not be in a position to cover those additional expenses that will happen regardless of what you choose to do. This is, again, not even to mention that your retirement needs are going to increase year over year, as the end goal is probably going to increase of where you need to be and how much you need to have in that pot to be able to comfortably retire and live the retirement that you want to. So again, your source of income right now is your practice. You are in control of what you take in and what you take out and what you spend as far as your overhead goes. And if you are not staying up with both the discounting of fees in your practice as well as the increasing of fees overall, you will lag behind. One other point, which we deal with a lot, are practices that don't increase their fees for whatever it may be for 3, 5, even 10 years. What that does on a purchaser side is that it hampers their ability to maintain the practice and take in collections, because they cannot come in on day one and immediately jump the fees up to the rate that they should be for the marketplace. So you keeping up with that is vitally important for a purchaser's review and due diligence and really detailed review of a practice, let alone what a lender is going to look at or one of their advisors, because they want to know that things have been kept up to date. One other thing, that if you are not increasing your fees, you will be seeing your overhead percentage increase over time. Because again, all of these expenses are going up, so your practice will present lesser than if you were to able to keep up with that, because you would keep your collections in line again with your growing overhead. So there are a lot of reasons why you need to keep up with your fees, and they are all vitally important. So if we're looking at fee increases just by the numbers, let's say you have an $800,000 practice with a 3% increase every year for 5 years. You can see on the left-hand side, you go from 800 to 824 to 848, 74, 900, and 927. You can see in the middle column the annual increase per year, and on the far right, the annual increase from our baseline of 800,000. What you'll notice is that we're not talking about you're adding $24,000 per year. By the time you get a little bit into it, you start adding now 26 and 27,000. And this is doing the exact same procedures every single year, which is not what happens. But just for the case of the example, you are going to do exactly the same thing. And the only thing you're going to do in your practice is increase your fees. So the middle column where we see the annual increase is the year over year. But if you look at the far right, this is the cumulative total of those 5 years. Each year you're taking in that much more money. So at the end of the day, you're taking home in year 5, you've taken home $375,000 more than you would have if you had not increased your fees at all. It's a very easy change to make in your practice. And we all are cognizant that everybody's expenses are going up everywhere, but it is vitally important that as a service provider, you keep your fees up to date. If we take this one step further, remember we had 127,000 just in the annual increases. So if we just look at that second column, you had $127,000 there. If you were to only take the $127,000 of additional increase per year, we put that into an investment fund over time, 30 years, 5%, that compounded difference is almost $475,000. That is not even assuming the collective total of the $375,000 that you would potentially be doing something else with for the most part. This is just 1/3 of that, which is the increase year over year, putting that away. Again, this is your retirement. So there are lots of ways to do things in your practice to not only set you up for transition and set you up for future value, but set you up for that future retirement as well. I just want to circle back on one other thing as we close today. Christy talked about and had a great example, thank you, Christy, about the emergency exit plan and why that's important. We all deal with this, and this is the phone call that we never want to get. I've had cases where a practitioner was not wearing their seatbelt and they were thrown out of a car and died instantly. These things just happen. We also have cases, which is the story of my former partners in business. One who's retired, one is still my father, who had to retire from practicing dentistry. They didn't pass away, but they had to retire because they had a disability. And the question is, well, what happens in those cases, especially if you're not being able to make the shot, call the shots? So as Christy shared before, which is the same QR code here, please, this is free. We provide it to you. Go ahead and download the letter of instructions that we have, which is important for you to keep in your practice. And as Christy said, keep another copy at home, somewhere else. These are all those things and contacts that if something were to happen to you, somebody would know what to do with it. As soon as possible after that, get a practice valuation and keep that up to date. Not only is it an opportunity for us to evaluate and tell you what you can do in your practice, having this on file will move things quicker if something were to happen to you. If you have partners in a practice, if you have any purchase agreements that are sitting out there, please have them reviewed by an experienced transition consultant. We're not looking at it on the legal side. We're looking for the transition concerns and what may pop up as an issue in a transition itself. We may also suggest that you look at it by legal counsel or have your legal counsel look at it, because they're able to give you advice that is beyond our ability, which is, again, transactional, but in conjunction, they can give you anything that would be a legal pitfall. Also, please have your leases reviewed. please take a look at those. There are many clauses in leases that may prevent your eventual transaction or cost you a ton of money. So especially in the case of an emergency exit, you'd want to make sure that that's not on the table and that you've cleared those up. So please, please, please have your leases reviewed by somebody who understands leases, and again, possibly by your legal counsel as well. Any feedback that we give you, any feedback that you get from leases or otherwise, have those conversations with your CPA and attorney. Everybody is on the same team for you. Everybody's looking out for you, but you have to have those conversations and you need to be proactive to request that. So again, you can go to this URL here. You can also go to the QR code and we'll give you that letter of instructions for free. And again, as we think it's so important, this is the QR code again for the valuation. This is something, again, we've spent a lot of time over the last few months putting together a brand new updated report, as Christy mentioned. We brought in a lot of exclusive resources to help enhance this report. We're the only ones that have that relationship with Henry Schein One and Jarvis to get additional documentation and data for your practices. And our experience is really unparalleled throughout the country. So this is something that you should have on file. Again, not only for the emergency exit, but just for planning for transition. It's super important. Thank you, Christy. Thank you, Jack. We appreciate your insights. You have a lot of local on-the-ground knowledge, and you both have been in dentistry for quite a while. We hope that you have found this useful, and we look forward to working with you. Just as a reminder, this presentation was recorded, and we will be sending that out to all registrants after the webinar in the next few days. So you can keep an eye on that if you want to watch it again. But again, thank you, Jack. Thank you, Christy. Thank you all for joining us. And we look forward to working with you soon.